What's going on, guys? Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Eastern Current. Super excited about tonight's episode. Before we get to that, I'm going to do a couple pre-show things. We want to thank our sponsors, AFCO and iStrike, just great supporters of the show, co-promoters of the show, and they've been a huge help to growing our listeners and our viewers. The next thing I want to do is tell you all about our Facebook group, Eastern Current Fishing. You can go check that out. It's for all of our listeners to be able to kind of create a community and talk fishing together and interact. And hopefully get out in the water with someone new and learn from each other. So check that out. Last thing, if you really do like this podcast and want to help us financially, it's a big time commitment for me to put this out weekly, as well as a bit of a money commitment. So you can do $5 or $10 donations per month. I'll link the Patreon page in my show notes on YouTube as well as on the podcast platforms. But that's it for me. Let's bring on our guest. Today we're going to be talking kayak fishing and fishing from a flat skiff, and we got a great guest on who just a really cool dude. I'm just gonna bring him on. I'm a little scatterbrained here. All right, what's going on, Roger? How you doing?
I'm good with being called a really cool dude. I like that.
He's a really cool dude, you guys. Check him out.
No, doing well. Just doing the hunkering down, working from home. Watching this beautiful weather outside, wishing that I was able to fish, but it's been conference call day, but that's all over now.
There you go, and I got you sitting in front of a computer again, so you're probably thanking me.
Oh, yeah.
Or a phone, but awesome. Yeah, the weather's been crushing me today, too. I've been at the house as well, working on the computer all day, and I was proud of myself. It's really hard for me some days to not make up an excuse to go fish when it's like this, so it was good. Well, Roger, we got to get out on the water the other day together for the first time, which was cool. We do a little albacore fishing, and Roger and I we don't go way back, but my father-in-law and him go way back, and y'all grew up together, correct?
Absolutely. We went to school together, went to Cape Fear Community College, and even worked together after that for a number of years, 4 or 5 years, and then have always stayed in touch.
That's cool.
Great guy.
That's cool. He's a good dude, and it was cool to know. I was already following you on Instagram. I think we were following each other on Instagram before I met my wife, and he was like, "You know Roger?" I was like, "I don't know Roger, but we both fish," and it was just kind of a cool coincidence. But yeah. So what I really wanted to pick your brain about, and something that stood out the other day when we were on the water together, was when you said that you feel like you outfish yourself on a kayak as opposed to a boat, 90% of the time. And I hear that from so many anglers that fish a lot from kayaks and boats together. So before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about your backstory and kind of how you got into fishing, and then we'll jump into that topic of kayak fishing.
Oh, I don't think my story's too unlike a lot of the guests that I hear on your podcast. It was something that, my father and he had a little aluminum boat, and we would go out in the Intercoastal Waterway when I was a kid and just put dead shrimp on a 2-dropper rig and catch spots and croakers for the most part. But I got away from fishing for a long, long time. When my girls started getting a little bit older, we bought a sort of a ski boat, and then we ran around. We're still on the water, but I wasn't fishing. And then, the rest of the story. They're all grown up and have kids of their own now. Right. So about 7 years ago, my wife went kayaking with a friend of hers, and nothing doing. We had to go get kayaks after that because she was hooked. And on the way back from buying the kayaks in Southport from a dealer there, we stopped at Walmart to get a couple of life jackets so we could get on the water. And right beside the life jackets was this little Shimano, not Shimano, I think Shakespeare.
I was about to say Shimano at
tackle
Walmart.
Box. No, it was Shakespeare because it only lasted about 3 trips before it completely locked up. But long story short, we were out. We started kayaking, and I brought that little rig with me and started putting on some gulp baits, and I think there was some Bass Assassins or something in the little. The whole rig was $30 and you got everything. So I started catching a few fish and it really got hooked on it again, brought back all those childhood memories. And then it was on after that. It was better kayaks, bigger kayaks. Had to buy a boat. I mean, it's cost me tens of thousands
Yeah.
for that free fish dinner.
Exactly. Yeah, you said the other day you're like the most expensive free meal you'll ever have, which is the 100%.
That's
free.
right.
But if you're already going to be doing it, the hobby, then it is a free meal. Because I would fish even if it wasn't
Right.
for food. So it makes sense. It makes sense. But that's a cool backstory. Well, let's jump into the topic that I feel like I get more traction and more questions about, kayak fishing and paddleboard fishing than anything else. I think because it's an easier, way for people to get into fishing. It's typically a little cheaper, though some kayaks can get pretty expensive, as well as paddleboards. But let's talk about how that kayak fishing evolved for you from when you had the Shakespeare rod and the first kayak and kind of where that went for you and what kind of kayaks you're in today, if that makes sense. It's kind of a very open-ended question.
Well, actually, on the front end, I bought a pretty nice kayak. We bought Kaikus, and we had a couple of, I think they're called Wahoo. Still has hers, but they cut through the water really well, and they had good rod holders and things on them. But the problem with those were that the seat sat on the bottom.
Gotcha.
And as you can attest, a few hours in that will make your back just completely get stuck at a 90-degree. So I started. I went to a Hobie dealer, and I went to a Hobie kind of a tryout day where they put them all in a big test pond for you. Okay. And I got into a Hobie PA Pro Angler 14, which is basically I would say it's the Ranger Bass boat of kayaks. And so I went from kind of a beginner level kayak all the way up, to the limousine. And it really is an unfair advantage for anybody that you're fishing with that still has a paddle in their hand, because you're fishing the whole time. You can hold in current. You'll turn on a dime. You can stand up in it. It's just, I can't say enough good Hobie platform, and it has put me in water that I would have never gotten the opportunity to fish before that, because you can go in so skinny, you can pull the drive out, you can paddle if you need to. Like you and I were talking about the other day, is the whole kayak fishing side of things is I just fish where nobody else fishes.
Yeah.
When you see people out on the water, and a lot of the regular hot spots, you see people posted up at those, and a lot of boats and different things. I don't even fish those areas. I just go right to the marsh, or I can go under docks and go back in places where other boats can't. So it's just a good platform to fish from, and you do a really, really thorough job, and you get really inventive and creative when you're in a kayak, because even with a good pedal drive kayak, I don't want to go probably more than about 4 miles, a couple of miles out, maybe a couple of miles back. I know there's a lot of people that really just go on these long adventures, right? But I guess I'm getting old, getting a little tired. But no, the kayak platform is really awesome.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a cool platform. And one of the things you said that rang out to me, and the other, well, the first thing is being able to fish around docks so well. So like being able to get behind docks, get under docks, and fish them way more thoroughly. I think that's a really cool ability. And right now and in the winter, dock fishing sometimes isn't the strongest. But I mean, if you can truly go and work down a whole line of docks in the summer, throwing soft plastics and jigs from a kayak, you're going to find fish pretty quickly. I feel like you can't fish them quite as thoroughly with a boat. A lot of times you can just fish the tips, and if there's a lot of current, it's hard to fish them anyways. But being able to be in a kayak and get under them is huge. And the other thing, and I don't know if you do a ton of this, but like some of the guys that fish the jetty with a kayak, like they can get so close to those rocks, even if they are kind of bumping the rocks and light swell that's not breaking, it's not a huge deal, which I think is really cool, especially for the sheepshead fishing out there and some of the redfish. Being able to get straight up above them and drop down is neat. Like you don't want to do that on a fiberglass boat, but with a kayak you can get up in there and be a little risky. So would you say what's a day of kayak fishing look like for you? Like if you're gonna leave, it's a nice early summer day and conditions are right for whatever you want to do. What is your kind of game plan?
One of the first things I always do, and the biggest enemy to a kayak fisherman is the wind, I think, by far. I mean, the current I have no issues with, even on a super high coefficient day. Still don't have any problems with the current. You can just chug right along against that. But the wind has such an effect, especially on big boats like I've got. So I make sure I check that wind finder app and pay attention to what's going on there, and then that will guide me into which direction that I go. Am I going to go more north up at Topsail into some areas that are more protected, or am I going to hang out here? I live in Hampstead, or I'm going to hang around the Hampstead area where all our marsh is all open here, so I'm going to get a lot of wind out there if it's a windy day. But if it's perfect, I'm going to get up super early. I'm going to be in the water when it's still dark, and I'm going to be heading to my spot, and I'm going to have the top water tied on, because that's my passion, without a doubt.
It's hard to beat a top water blow up, especially from a kayak. I bet, like at water level, and that fish comes up and smokes a top water plug. That's got to be pretty cool.
Yeah, especially when they hit it right beside the boat, because what I found out with kayak fishing, you're really not alien to the fish, because I was up at Topsail. I was in one of my favorite little bays there, and there was all sorts of activity. There was all sorts of bait busting up against the grass, which typically something's pushing them up against the grass. And I'm throwing and I'm not getting anything at all. I'm about 50 yards off of the grass, and I must have made 5 or 6 casts, and I didn't catch a single thing. So I was getting ready to kind of move on. But when I went to bring my rod in, I banged my rod real hard against the side of the boat just by accident, and all the water around me just erupted. I was sitting in a school of redfish. I was casting completely over them, and I was in the school with the kayak, and they weren't even scared at all, or weren't even spooked. Now, they spooked like crazy when they went everywhere when I hit that boat, but had no idea I was there. So, and it's the same thing with sea turtles and all sorts of things that you encounter. It's just like they don't even mind you're there. They really don't pay a lot of attention to you.
Yeah, that's incredible.
So that's a really cool aspect of it. When I come rolling in there in my flat skiff with the trolling motor buzzing and all that, I can usually see the fish too. I can see them running away. So
it's crazy, man. The pressure fish get so smart, and being able to fish from a platform like a kayak or paddleboard really does give you an advantage. I think the only downfall is your range. You know what I mean? Like once you're in the stuff where you want to fish, you can't beat it. But the range of being able to like travel and hit different spots. Let's talk a little bit about that too. Like you talked a bit about fishing thoroughly, but the lack of range oftentimes can help you. I'd say catch more fish if it's the right scenario. Let's talk a little bit about how a lot of times, we were talking about this the other day, I get messed up when I get in a little bit of a rut. I start running around and checking too much stuff instead of sitting there and really focusing on where I'm at. How does a kayak help you in those scenarios?
Well, I typically I work an area in my kayak strategically, and I do the same thing in the boat. One of the things, I just love to drive that boat. I run and gun all over the place when I'm in that. But when I'm putting my kayak in, some of the things I'm thinking about before I launch is I want to have a place where I've got access to deep water with current. I want some flats. I want to be able to reach some flats. I'd like to be able to reach some creek mouths. So it's all about the diversity of what I can get to, because there's several really good places to launch. I mean, there's free places to launch all up and down, from Wilmington all the way to Topsail, and they're all in some really good fishing areas as far as being able to get to those areas. Yeah. But if I had one single thing that I was going to look for in kayak, it would actually be docks, and it would be docks that are up against hard banks. I love the docks that have the little marsh islands that extend out from a hard bank, and maybe there's some shell and things like that. Mm-hmm. I see a lot of people that I'm in those areas catching fish, and then a lot of other people are just buzzing by, and even with the boat traffic and so forth. Some of these really, really good accessible spots are right off the ICW.
Oh yeah,
and a lot of the little on the inland side of the Intercoastal Waterway, where there's a lot of the little small dugout marshes and things. Maybe they're not dugout, but they're just a little small marsh system.
Or a little more contour or something going on.
I was looking for. Right. And you'll fish those because of your range, and then you'll find I would have passed them by in a boat, and I would have never thought twice about going.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Again, most of the places that we go, I had a kind of a funny story. I was in one of these little areas, and there was some guys in a really nice bay boat, just in deep enough water to float it, and I was probably 120 yards from them, and I had to get across a really shallow flat to get in some deep water again. And depending on what your tidal coefficient is that day, sometimes even in those little bay areas, you'll get some pretty good current. So it was a little tough, and it was just loaded with nice trout. And I caught 3, probably from, 16 to maybe 19 inches. Okay. And the guy finally asked me he says, "What are you using for bait?" And I said, "A voodoo shrimp." And he had never heard of a voodoo shrimp before. Uh-huh. And he says, "Hey, if you don't want to tell me, don't tell me. Don't just make up stuff." So I slung one over in his boat, and I said, "Cut it off and keep it. That's what it is." And so I had to. It was getting dark, so I had to leave. And when I paddled by them, the other 2 gentlemen in the boat with him were laughing like crazy. And I introduced myself to them because I talked to everybody on the water. I introduced myself to them, and I said, "So what's so funny, guys?" And he said, "Watching you sit over there in that glorified piece of Tupperware catching trout, and we're in a $100,000 boat with 5 times the gear you have." He said, "That's what's funny."
It's so true. We can overcomplicate it and overbuy so easily. And that's part of it, though. I mean, as we get into it, and maybe not everyone's. I feel like most people that get into fishing are kind of gear geeks. Like, they want gear, they want boats, they want to have all the equipment and everything they need for the day on the water. But I think it's really cool when you slow down and you take a little bit less out on the water and you make it a little more simple. I think a lot of times that helps more than it hurts. So that's really cool.
Well,
$100,000.
Don't get.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and don't get so caught up with catching fish. Get caught up with out and enjoying yourself and having a good time. And the fish is just a plus.
Yeah.
Because we all go out there and we get skunked, or we're catching trash fish instead of what we're looking for. But just get out there and enjoy it and try to learn something.
Yeah.
Every time I go out, and I rarely learn anything when I'm catching fish because I'm just in that moment of catching fish. It's those days when I don't catch fish is when you're soul searching all the way back to back to the driveway.
Or the days you work really hard for that 1 or 2 bites, 3 bites, and you're like, wow, I've never fished this before this way, but it works. So, and then you learn that way, which is cool. So let's talk a little bit about then, like, what are your favorite fish to target inshore from a kayak or a boat? And we don't have to keep talking kayak. Like, if you want to throw in stuff about the boat in here as well. We'll talk about that beautiful boat that's sitting beside you for those of you who are listening and can't see it. What is it? It's a Hughes Redfisher?
Yeah, it's a Hughes Redfisher 18.
18.
I've barely got 10 hours on it, I think. So it's going to see a lot of use this summer for sure.
Heck yeah.
Well, cool. But it's go ahead.
No, sorry. I apologize for the listeners. The lag between the Skype call because of the bad service during the coronavirus is making our conversation a little tougher. We keep talking over each other, but that is Skype's fault, so don't blame it on us. But it's cool. That's a super cool boat. I see out in the water sometimes. I kind of keep my head down if I see other skiffs. I'm like, I don't know who that is. I'm just going to keep on running. But now I know that's Roger in that boat, so I'll be stopping and saying hey a little more often. But let's talk a little bit about the fish that you like to target inshore. Do you do any flounder fishing, or are you mostly focusing on redfish and trout when you got to target specific fish?
I flounder fish a little bit. Mm-hmm. It's all dependent on where I am. If I can really get around some deep, really crusty, nasty old structure, I like to flounder fish.
Yeah.
But this year, and we caught a pretty nice one a couple of weeks ago. It was a little over 19 inches. So for me, that was a pretty good sized flounder.
Yeah.
But he was we were definitely targeting trout when I hooked him, so he was just a volunteer. But I'm a big redfish guy. I love to fish for redfish. I love the blow-ups. Again, I'm a big-time topwater guy. I'll fish topwater way longer than I should. I'll let it drag out into the middle of the day. And then trout, in the fall. Actually, the spring, this time right now is really the time that I target trout.
Okay.
I've caught all of my larger trout have all been in April and late April. So, and it's all been super early in the morning with topwater. I think I caught maybe one on a Z-Man redbone. Yeah, it's all about that early morning topwater bite. I like to get out there super early. Most of the time I'm heading back home by 11 o'clock.
Yeah.
So
that's awesome. So is topwater for you mainly just a time of day thing, or are there certain other triggers or scenarios you're looking for where you're like, I should be throwing the topwater?
Anytime that I see some bait on the surface being pushed around, because I always have one tied on, so it's pretty easy. I usually, even on my kayak, I'll have 3 rods ready to go. I'll typically have, topwater on. I'll have something that's kind of a mid-weight, mid-water column bait, a mirror lure or an X-Wrap or something like that. And then, then something for the bottom, typically some sort of a Z-Man product. I like them the best just because of the durability.
Oh, so durable. And they look good too, and the colors are great. I think that is something that you just said there, that you just explained, that is such a big piece to fishing well, whether you're on a boat or you're on a kayak. But that's like having 3 or 4 rods set up with different style baits, different water columns or different retrieves, or so when you're working through an area, you can have those rods laying on your bow. You can have them in your kayak ready. Like throw a topwater across the point, no bites, toss a jig in there, bounce it. Fish 2 or 3 baits and have them ready so you can thoroughly and quickly fish through an area. Just because you don't get bit on a jig. I mean, there's been times too where I've fished a jig into an area and then thrown topwater on the way out and got caught fish. Just because they don't need a jig doesn't mean they won't need a topwater. They wanted a spoon or a chatterbait or a Ned rig or all these different lures that you can try. So how often are you switching between those when you're fishing?
That topwater bite, usually, when the sun's coming up and so forth, I'm pretty much sticking with that.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure there's some subsurface fish out there, but that's just, I'll probably pass up. If I could catch one fish on topwater versus 4 or 5 on a jig, I'm going to pick the topwater up every time. So I'm typically doing that. One of the things, and we talked about it a little bit the other day on your boat, one of the things I really got into last year that I had never tried before is the wake baits.
Oh, yeah.
I started when the topwater bite died, I would start, and if I still saw what I felt were evidence of fish in that area, bait still pushing and the big, the redfish swirls and so forth. And keeping in mind, most of the time, unless I'm fishing docks, I'm in 18 inches of water for the most part. Yeah. Still really not able to see the reds because I typically fish farther north in that darker water. But if they're being finicky and I know that the top water's going right over their heads, I'll throw a wake bait, which is these little, I don't know if you can see that or not, but these little mans. I like these.
Yeah.
And if you've got a really nice deep pocket that you can afford them, I've got one of these. This is a hunchback. Really great
sweet
bait, but boy, they're super ugly. So I think that might help to get the strikes. But throw these. I throw these, and they really have a tremendous action. They've got loud rattles in them. The back of the bait really swings violently, and the faster you retrieve it, the deeper it will go. So you can treat it exactly like a topwater, or you can retrieve it at a medium speed and it'll run just under the surface, and you speed it up a little bit. You might even get it a couple of inches under the water. But they have really, I've had them follow that all the way to my rod tip and hit it last year. So I'm super excited about, I really got involved in these a little later in the season, so I'm super excited about trying these this year. My wife caught her first redfish on one of these. We were actually on the boat, and she had casted it a couple of times. And I heard her say, I'm stuck on something. And I think I told you that
Yeah.
right to the lure. And when she was reeling against the drag. I said, raise the rod tip really hard, really fast. And so she raised the rod tip real hard, and then it took off. And then it was her wake bait redfish, and naturally it was the biggest one of the day.
Yeah, of course.
Because
if
you want to catch, it's like Wade, who's my main fishing partner that you met the other day. I can go out on my boat. We can go out for 6 or 7 hours, and I can front end that guy all day. I'm up on the trolling motor. I can front end him all day, and he'll catch 3 to my 1 every single time. So
that's the way it works.
Haven't figured that out yet. I'm gonna give him trolling motor, dude.
Yeah, you need to. You definitely need to. You need to duct tape the remote to his hand. Do you have a tiller trolling motor or a remote?
No, I've got a remote. I've got
cool.
iPilot.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, before we leave the wake bait thing, we're going to talk a little bit more. But before we leave the wake bait thing, just for people that don't know, it's pretty much like a crankbait with the bill facing straight down. So it just creates this wobble of that bait on the surface. So it's a floating bait. Yeah, there it is. Perfect. It looks like a square bill, but just a little bit more straight down. Great baits. They're really popular in the bass world, but I think that, the way they look like a pushing injured mullet on the surface, even more so than a walk the dog bait. If you're not fishing them, you need to start fishing them. I think it's, and I feel like maybe, do you like those in calmer water, or have you caught them in choppier water as well on a wake bait?
I got started in it so late last season. I don't think I had the opportunity to throw it in really bad wind. When the wind is really blowing and it's crazy out there and it's white capping, I still top water fish, but I'll go to something bigger like a one knocker spook. Is it one knocker or one knock?
One knocker.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. One knocker.
One knocker. Yeah.
What's your color
that
of
just makes
choice?
A ton of racket.
You got it.
This beat up guy right there, Bone.
Oh, the bone color. Yeah, it's hard to beat. The
bone. But my favorite all-time topwater lure, and it's what I've caught all my better trout, and actually my better redfish on, is much smaller than that, which is this little number 8 skitterwalk.
Oh yeah, frog color.
This one happens to be a frog, but I think it's got more to do with that little bit of chartreuse on the bottom.
Yeah, definitely.
But using a smaller bait, especially if I'm fishing around docks, I love to throw parallel to the dock all the way back to where the dock intersects land. Throw it all, even if I can just throw it in the mud there, and then pull it off and then walk it all the way down just as close as I can get to those ponds. I lose a lot of topwaters that way. I've had to upgrade my leader situation and all, but these smaller skitterwalks, they walk real tight. You can keep them in the strike zone a long time, and when the redfish hits it, he's got it. It's in his mouth. Yeah. So my hookup ratio went from probably 50% to probably 80% just by downsizing the topwater.
Yeah, they get a little sloppy eating a topwater at times. So if you're not throwing topwater, we're almost at 30 minutes, and I want to pick your brain a little bit more about some other baits that you like to use. If you're not throwing a topwater, what are some of your other confidence baits, your search baits from a kayak or from your boat?
X-Wrap,
which
I think we all know what those are, and they're really if I'm in current and I've pulled up against the grass and thrown an anchor in or something, I'm just sitting in current. You can throw one of these out and just put it in a rod holder, and that's been my day saver. I've caught many times bigger trout with that in the rod holder, just sitting back there, because it swims really nice. It flutters, and it's, especially if you can set up so it's fluttering by a point.
Yeah.
They'll, if there's one around, he'll come pick that up. But I started fishing these little Z-Man shrimp. I don't exactly know what the name of them is, but I do have one here. But on a Ned rig. And I always thought this was always too small. I've always, starting off in fishing, I was always a bigger bait guy. But I'm finding that elephants eat peanuts, and that's a true statement. And I catch a lot more fish on finesse baits, the smaller Z-Mans. I think this is a Paddler Z, but it's not a very big bait.
Yeah, they're 3-inch baits,
but,
maybe?
maybe that
I
one's
think
that might be That might be the 4 or the
Okay.
3.5 or something like that. But it's I was buying all of the larger ones, and half the time I end up cutting part of it off and rigging it smaller.
Yeah.
I think it's the flutter. I think it's that crazy action these things have. But an upper slot redfish will hit that in a minute. So it's not always about bigger baits. I think maybe in the marsh they don't have access to as large a prey as they would have out on a bigger flat or a dock or something like that. So I don't know.
The way I kind of feel about it, and let me know if this is what you think too, is like when I'm in an area that I might be a little less confident that the fish are focused in that area, I'm fishing a bait with more presence, like a topwater, a spoon, a chatterbait, a bigger paddle tail. And when I'm in an area where I'm like, all right, I really know these fish are here, I want to like break it down real well. A lot of times I'm fishing a smaller bait, like the stuff you're describing, and picking it apart and moving a little bit slower. Like your large presence baits and your smaller presence baits. Is that kind of what you do? Or I feel like a lot of the stuff that you're fishing too in your kayak, you're going to like where the fish are. There's not as much searching. You've put in the time and found these little zones, and so you're sitting there and picking it apart real hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the other thing is when you find a zone that holds fish, or you have pretty good luck in that one area, go in and really walk it, or go there on low tide or something, and find out what makes it magic for the fish, because that's how I found other places. Because if I found 2 or 3 spots that typically hold fish, and those 2 or 3 spots all had the same attributes. In the marsh, in the bays, it's a little bit different. But yeah. When I'm going out on new water or running around on my boat now, I'm just looking for places that have those things. And, 50% of the time, you find a fish or two on them. Yeah. Even if it's a place you've never fished before.
That's super cool. I need to figure out what the shrimp are called. I don't know if I've seen that Z-Man shrimp. Does it just have small tentacles off the head? I haven't fished that one.
I think it's called a jerk shrimp.
Jerk shrimp, okay. Yeah,
got all sorts of stuff going. Yeah. And this is I've had quite a few fish on this, just dead sticking it, just letting it. Trout love this thing.
Yeah, I bet.
They really do.
What Ned head are you fishing on?
I think it's 1/10 or something like that. It's super small.
Sweet.
It's a Z-Man Ned head, and it's got a really skinny wire, but it's super strong. I've yet to straighten one out.
Right on. Is that the color of the shrimp you'll usually go to, that pink?
Yeah, I think this is Laguna. I'm going by memory. Laguna pink or something like that.
Pink. Laguna Madre.
The redfish like it too.
Yeah, I bet.
It could be.
Anytime you can stand a bait up like that, I think that's the beauty of a Ned rig in salt water is, you can work it like a jig, and then you stop it, and with those Z-Mans, they float, and so that everything's just sitting there, and you can barely move it and just shake that bait around and really get a lot of good action from it, which is neat. But I've fished a Ned rig some. It's not something. It's a harder bait for me to get clients to throw well. I would fish it a lot more if I fished on my own a lot, but I've got to find baits that I can kind of like a little more carelessly work through the water and get bites on. Like the Ned rig, you're going to get more bites on it. You're going to get those trickier fish, but a lot of times I'm stuck with like having to look for those aggressive fish and throw a bait that they might move for a little bit. But that Ned rig is one that is deadly. So many people that I've talked to on the podcast lately, they bring up the Ned rig and how it's really opened up some doors for them.
I actually was forced to use the Ned rig. A friend of mine gave me one on the boat, and he said, "No, you've got to use this. You've got to tie it on, and you've got to use it." And so I did, and I was skeptical, but it worked.
Nice. Well, is there anything else before we finish up that you want to share with anybody that works a normal job and gets out there and tries to get it done, catch some fish on the weekend? Any tips or encouragement or anything like that?
Well, my tips are for myself is always set the bar low. Go out there to have a good time. If you catch a few fish, hey, that's fantastic. But just go out and have a good time, especially if you're going to be in that kayak, because you're in nature. I mean, they don't mind you being there. I mean, I've eased up on turkeys and just just wonderful wildlife. But
yeah.
And get and if you like our fishery here, get involved in some of the groups that are around. Check out the CCA and the other organization that you and I like, but we can never remember
the name
to it. North Carolina something resource. But anyway, find out what you can do to help us take care of this wonderful resource we have here, and things that we can do to make sure that I know this might sound a little bit canned, but we've got something for our kids and our grandkids to do.
For sure.
Once we're out of the game, because it's a resource that won't be here if we don't take care of it.
No, it won't. And
sure.
It's it's on the verge of being a little scary. So I think that's a great way to leave people. And I appreciate you coming on and talking. I think that kayak anglers and weekend warriors are people who we can really all learn something from, because they're effective ones. I mean, there might be some guys that go out on the weekends and don't catch any fish, and I'm sure we can still learn from them. But guys like you that really get it done in the time that they've got are people that I want to learn from. So I appreciate it, and thank you so much for coming on. And if y'all want to get up with Roger, check him out on Instagram. It's RogerJ65, and you can see his kayak, his boat, his fish, everything there. So check him out and see if you can be lucky enough to be like Wade and get to spend some time on the boat with him.
Hey, we're all about going fishing with different people. It's a lot of fun. Met a lot of great people that way.
Definitely. Well, cool, guys.
Thanks a lot for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much, Roger. I'm going to switch back over. Again, guys, thanks for checking out this episode. Check Roger out. Go follow him on Instagram. Just a really, really cool dude, like I said earlier, that catches a lot of cool fish. So follow him. And thank you all for checking out Eastern Current and supporting Eastern Current. And we will see y'all in the next episode. Later. Oh, I'm struggling. I can't find the end button. Here we go.